Hey everybody, and welcome to Leia's Lair. Today's episode, we have combined the videos on lightsaber combat forms 1 through 7 in canon. Enjoy! Form 1, also known as Shi Cho, the Way of the Sarlacc, or the Determination form, was developed by the Jedi and is the oldest and most introductory form of lightsaber combat. This combat form was taught to all Jedi of the Jedi Order. Compared to other forms, Form 1 was considered direct, even simplistic. However, because of its simplicity, it remained a popular form for Padawans throughout their training, and full Jedi Knights continued to practice the form throughout the Order's history. For Jedi with full command of multiple forms, Form 1 often served as a last resort when others failed, or in situations that rendered more specialized forms impractical. The origins of Form 1 are unclear, likely due to the amount of time that has passed since it was created. It was possible that Form 1 was originally seen as the only effective or proper way to wield a lightsaber. It was also possible that Form 1 represented the synthesis of several styles of lightsaber combat that arose at the same time. Form 1 focused on direct attacks over acrobatic mobility, making it appear aggressive. However, this was misleading, as Form 1 required a calm, collected, methodical approach. Users of Form 1 would attack frequently in order to take advantage of any opening presented by their foe. They usually intended to disarm an opponent instead of hurting them. They would always return to a defensive stance after each strike and made extensive use of parries. Form 1 was a balance of defense and offense, and it advocated for the philosophy that the defeat of a foe without inflicting serious injury as the highest form of victory. Notable users of Form 1 were Kit Fisto and the Grand Inquisitor. Form 2, also known as Makashi, was the second form of lightsaber combat invented by the Jedi Order. It is considered the most graceful and elegant form of lightsaber combat. Form 2 arose in direct response to the appearance of enemies who also carried lightsabers, the Sith. Specifically, the omnidirectional edge of an enemy's lightsaber, as well as its lack of mass, opened up new attacks that Form 1 simply could not counter. As the Sith were the first truly equal foe to the Jedi, both sides looked for ways in which they could gain an advantage over the other. This included adding a second lightsaber, something that the techniques of Form 1 were completely unsuited to. While Form 2 began to develop, using two lightsabers still felt awkward. This led to the emergence of the Shoto-style saber. Form 2 is strongly focused on one-on-one combat, and its defensive maneuvers reflected that. If Form 2 users were faced against multiple foes, other lightsaber techniques could be used. Form 2 required immense precision and placed a high focus on avoiding being disarmed, while disarming one's opponent instead. Of all the lightsaber combat forms, Form 2 encouraged personalization by the practitioner and placed a strong emphasis on the psychological aspects of the duel. The most notable user of Form 2 was Count Dooku. He would go on to teaching Asajj Ventress the combat form, though hers was less elegant looking. Another notable user was Ki-Adi-Mundi. Form 3, also known as Soresu, the Way of the Mynock, or the Resilience form, was the third form of lightsaber combat created by the Jedi Order. Form 3 arose when there was a widespread emergence of blasters as an offensive weapon in the galaxy. It was created as a way to counter blaster fire, something that Form 1 was ineffective at doing, and something that Form 2's techniques completely lacked. What was key in the use of Form 3 was a lightsaber's ability to deflect blaster fire back at an opponent. Form 3 was the most defensive of the 7 lightsaber forms, and its intent was to provide near-total protection and minimize exposure to ranged fire. Its stances presented a minimal target to an opponent, and also limited the area the Soresu practitioner had to defend with lightsaber parries and blocks. Form 3 made use of tight moves, subtle dodges, and efficient parries. It stressed quick reflexes and fast positional transitions with a lightsaber that would move every second. If executed proficiently, Form 3 could be used against single or multiple opponents with blasters or lightsabers. Users of Form 3 had the ability to control combat situations, allowing them to choose whether they killed, disarmed, or reasoned with their opponent. The form was considered to be quite well-rounded, facilitated survival compared to victory, and depended on outlasting one's opponents. Notable canon users of Form 3 were Obi-Wan Kenobi, Depa Billaba, Kanan Jarrus, Barriss Offee, Luminar Unduli, and the Grand Inquisitor. Form 4, also known as Ataru, or the Aggression Form, was the fourth form of lightsaber combat invented by the Jedi Order. An acrobatic combat style, Form 4 could be used to defend against incoming projectiles, but was best suited for open spaces and attacking. It was developed centuries after Form 3, and in many ways is the direct opposite of Form 3. Form 4 focuses almost exclusively on offense, with practitioners seeking to end a fight as quickly as possible versus outlasting their foe. Compared to Form 1, Form 4 placed greater emphasis on the use of the Force to enhance movement in all aspects of combat. Instead of using continuous strikes and waiting for an opening, Form 4 sought to end a fight swiftly by rapidly overpowering the foe with a flurry of blows. The form was incredibly demanding physically, and prolonged application could exhaust any practitioner. The practitioner would use parries, blocks, and other defensive techniques to protect themselves long enough to close in on their opponent and use a flurry of attacks. In overcoming the offensive limitations of Soresu, Form 4 admitted equally significant defensive limitations. Practitioners of Form 4 use leaps and somersaults to attack their enemies from a variety of angles, and as such, Form 4 was best executed in open areas where space was substantial. Although all Jedi drew on the Force in their mastery of lightsaber combat, Form 4 featured many movements that were clearly impossible without using the Force, even for the most athletically accomplished sentients. Form 4 was best used in one-on-one lightsaber combat. If the practitioner was faced with multiple opponents or opponents with blasters, other lightsaber combat forms could be used. Without doing so, even the most skilled Form 4 expert could scarcely hope to defeat all foes before a blaster or blade penetrated their meager defenses. Notable practitioners of Form 4 are Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, Ezra Bridger, Aayla Secura, and the Grand Inquisitor. Form 5, also known by its two main disciplines, Shien or Djem So, was the fifth form of lightsaber combat used by members of the Jedi Order. The Shien discipline made use of a reverse grip, and the Djem So variant utilized solid defending immediately followed by a strong counterattack. Form 5 as a whole was developed by Form 3 practitioners who felt they needed to be more offensive. While they still valued the defensiveness of Form 3, they sought a form that could better incorporate offensive attacks. Chien was the first variant of Form 5 to appear. Similar to Soresu, Chien sought an effective combat style to oppose the continued occurrence of blasters throughout the galaxy. Chien's main goal in this sense was to not only stop blaster fire, but also to reflect it back at the enemies who were firing at them. This technique would prove to be both useful and effective, so much so that virtually all Jedi incorporated it into their combat regardless of their form. The Djem So variant of Form 5 was developed centuries later to address the form's inadequacies in melee combat. Djem So emphasized defense against melee attacks, particularly by foes wielding lightsabers. The principles and approach, however, were largely the same as Chien, and the maneuvers and techniques that did vary were not adequately different to mark Djem So as a distinct form. Chien and Djem So sought to control the momentum of battle, cleverly using whatever circumstances arose to their advantage. Most practitioners of Form 5 practiced both Chien and Djem So techniques to remain prepared for any type of foe, though practitioners might have favored one over the other. Notable practitioners of Form 5 are Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano, Aayla Secura, Adi Gallia, Kat Keen, and the Grand Inquisitor. Form 6, also known as Niman, was the sixth form of lightsaber combat used by members of the Jedi Order. It was the last form of lightsaber combat to gain widespread acceptance by the Jedi Order. By the time of the Clone Wars, Form 6 was the most common form of lightsaber combat in use. Form 6 was a hybrid of the previous 5 forms. By taking qualities from each of the other lightsaber combat forms, Form 6 avoided many of the weaknesses present in those forms. However, because it took so many qualities from Forms 1 to 5, Form 6 never achieved the full potential and strengths seen in the other forms. Consequently, some Jedi considered Form 6 a diluted form of lightsaber combat. Form 6 could be used to combine double-bladed lightsaber combat with other Force abilities, like pushes and lifts. Specifically, it made extensive use of the Force to hinder an opponent's movements. Such techniques could bring opponents within range for a lightsaber strike or push them away as a defensive move. Form 6 emphasized balance and harmony and was not as deadly as the other lightsaber combat forms. This was done intentionally by its creators, as they sought to master a style of lightsaber combat that could achieve victory without dominating the opponent. They wanted to defend themselves and even deliver justice without the temptation of power. Form 6 was significantly less physically demanding than other forms, likely because of its focus on Force powers over blade work. Because of this, it was an attractive option for Jedi who wished to commit their energies to studies of areas outside of the martial. In battle with opponents who used other lightsaber forms, a user of Form 6 would have to make greater use of Force powers than was normally seen in lightsaber combat. Notable canon users of Form 6 are Darth Maul and the Grand Inquisitor. Form 7, known primarily by its two disciplines, Juyo or Vaapad, and also known as the Ferocity Form, was the seventh form of lightsaber combat. It was known to be the most aggressive and controversial form of lightsaber combat. The first discipline, Juyo, began development millennia before Form 7 was formalized and likely came from techniques that were rejected from Shi Cho. Juyo was an intensely aggressive form, more so than any other form of combat. However, what truly made it different was the emotional state it elicited and required. Juyo made use of a highly aggressive offense that required the practitioner to actively draw on their negative emotions to fuel the assault. Eventually, the form would be forbidden by the Jedi Council. While this prohibition would relax to some extent, Form 7 would never widely be practiced again, except for those who received special permission or who defied the Council. Juyo required the practitioner to channel the Force with every movement and strike. This in turn made Juyo incredibly dangerous to both the enemy and the practitioner. With a strong focus on negative emotional states, it would bring the practitioner extremely close to the dark side. The second discipline of Form 7 was Vaapad. It was created in the final years of the Jedi Order and was the only variant of Form 7 to be recognized by the Jedi Council. Practitioners of Vaapad drew on their anger and passion, but never gave in to them. Compared with other lightsaber forms, which directed warriors to master their emotions, Vaapad's approach was dangerous. However, it was not as reckless as Juyo's manner of employing unchecked aggression. Vaapad was a clear example of Form 7. The practitioner fought with controlled fury, laying about with a combination of frenzied, rapid strikes and powerful blows. Notable canon users of Form 7 are Mace Windu, Depa Billaba, Darth Maul, and the Grand Inquisitor. If you are interested in knowing which combat form you would use, check out one of my many quizzes here. And there you have it. Thanks for watching, everyone. What did you think about this video? Let us know down below in the comment section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more great videos to come. I hope to see you all again in Leia's Lair.